Hello and welcome to Legal Thinking from RWK Goodman. I'm Liam Pape.
And I'm Ed Wootton.
In today's episode, we speak to professional jockey George Baker, who experienced severe brain injury during a race. He spoke about his experience with injury, how lucky he feels compared to others, and how actually accepting that his life had now changed aided in recovery, as getting over that mental hurdle and coming to the acknowledgement that things wouldn't quite be the same again actually really helped in the long run. We also speak to Richard Brooks, who is a partner at RWK Goodman and who specialises in personal injury and animal accidents. He explains whether George's reaction is typical for people with injuries of his type and more about the subject at large.
Yep, let's roll tape. Okay, so thanks for joining us on the podcast, George and Richard. George, I guess we'll first go to you. Are you able to give us just like a quick summary of the injury you had and how it happened?
Yeah, no problem. I had a fall. I was a professional jockey, and I went to St Moritz to ride on the white turf over there, which is they have 3 meetings a year up there. It's like a massive spectacle in St Moritz, and a trainer who I rode for, Jamie Osborne, had a team of horses going over, and they asked me if I wanted to go. So I headed over there for that Sunday fixture, and it was the first race of the day, and there was a weakness in the track, and my horse put his foot through the surface and fired me into the ground. Subsequently, broke both his front legs doing that, and I had a shearing brain injury from the impact, where I sort of, I don't know, arrow-like into the ground as such. So it was a pretty severe head injury, and I wasn't well for a long period of time.
And I mean, you're saying you're going racing in St Moritz. Obviously, your career was going pretty well up to that point. Like, you were a pretty successful jockey.
Yeah, I've been riding for. I was 34 years of age when it happened. I've been riding since I was 16, and I was what you call sort of a slow burner. It took me a while to sort of find my feet and get going. I had a good apprenticeship, and I grew quite a lot when I was coming up to lose my claim, and then I sort of had to rebuild, and I don't know what the word is, but I sort of changed my riding style as such for a different body shape, and that took a while to find a comfortable rhythm with that. And I was so in 2016, which was the last full season I had, was my best ever year, and I was building a good sort of career as such as a flat jockey.
Yeah. So once you'd had the head injury and you kind of realised something kind of more, well, I guess even before maybe you realised the full effect of it, what were you experiencing post-injury when you maybe tried to get back into horse racing?
So as it transpired, I was in St Moritz for a period of time, and then I got transported back to London to the Wellington Hospital by medical jet, because I wasn't able to sort of go through airport security and so forth. So I'm brought back that way, and I was in a thing called post-traumatic amnesia for 5 weeks, right, which is where you're ultimately, I could talk, but my brain was in a sort of safety mode. It was protecting me from the accident I'd had, and I could talk, but I would make very little sense, and I'd repeat myself a lot of the time. And for my family, it was a very strange time, because it was George was there, but it was making zero sense and talking a lot of gobbledygook as such, doing some very strange things in hospital. So
in a sense, it was more emotional for them.
I don't remember any of that. So that's why you sort of go into that safety mode as such, and your brain's protecting you from outside stuff. But for my family, they saw it all, so it was not very nice.
Yeah, and what were the challenges when you because did you try and get back into working with horse racing or racing at all afterwards, and what kind of challenges did you experience doing that?
Ultimately, with it, I had one aim, and that was to come back race riding, and I was never told. And to be fair, I wouldn't have believed it at the time. I wasn't thinking like a rational person, that I was able to come back and do my old career as being a jockey. But that sort of aided my recovery, because I had an end goal and I pushed. So from the accident, and where the Pacific bleed was on the part of my brain, it was sort of my coordination, balance. So I had to learn to walk again. And we don't use all our brain, the whole of our brain. So you can, if something happens to one part, you can rejig that and train another part to pick up that process. And that's what I had to do. So hence the reason why I still walk a bit like a thunderbird. I'm not as sort of able as I once was, but through the whole process, I can't tell you, I got the best possible care money can buy. And that helped me so much. One, to accept what I couldn't do. And in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad, because I was able to learn to walk again. I mean, it's frustrating when you're going through that process, and as such, a 34-year-old baby learning to do things again. But you know, a spinal injury person would pay everything they had to be able to do that, wouldn't they? So in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that bad, but it was frustrating for me at times, because I can remember what I was doing before and how I used to be, and my one aim was, when I sort of realised what had happened, that sort of month and a half period after, once I'd gone through all that strange thing with PTA, that I wanted to come back and be a jockey as such.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned the physical difficulties you had, but were there any kind of like mental or like hidden disabilities that you found that people just didn't maybe didn't get? Like you said when you were in the hospital, your family saw that you weren't making much sense, but once you're out of hospital, obviously if your brain is affected, there's various different kind of processes that the brain has control of, obviously. So were there any things that maybe, I don't know, memory or anything like that you found you were having trouble with, that maybe people didn't understand when you were trying to get back into racing?
It's very interesting. So it is interesting now when you look back at it. At the time, it was very strange, but for my wife, Nicola, and my sort of extended family, that I short-term memory was horrific, and I was given processes to improve that, and writing a diary was one of those things. She spoke to Alice Fox-Pitt, whose husband had been through a similar sort of process, and I wrote a diary. And when I say wrote a diary, I just put down who I'd spoken to on the day. I wasn't, I was allowed to have a mobile phone for short periods of time. I'd get very fatigue was my biggest thing. I was sleeping for sort of 13, 14 hours a day because I was recovering. And once I managed, sort of accepted that was the case and didn't try and fight it, then the process of writing that diary about who I dealt with through the day and bits and bobs, stuff like that, was important. And so it was all about, for me, was accepting the deficits that I had. And as frustrating as it was, you can't move forward until you know what your weaknesses are. As such, if you think, a lot of people that have brain injuries don't think there's anything wrong with them, and I was very lucky that I accepted what my weaknesses were, aimed to improve on them, and manage my time accordingly. So it was I don't know, all brain injuries are different. So I'd see people in the ward I was on in the Wellington Hospital that had been through similar sort of things, but their long-term memory was affected, so they didn't know who their family was. It's I suppose if you could play a brain injury card, to have to learn to walk again isn't that big a deal compared to some of the people that I saw when I was in hospital.
Well, it's admirable you say that. I'm pretty sure it's, yeah. But I guess bringing Richard in on this, in terms of your perspective, both as someone who's worked with brain injured clients and also people who have maybe received other serious injuries and are or were jockeys, how where is George's experience on your scale of stories you've seen? Is it pretty typical that, you know, people want to get back into horse racing, find it really difficult, or, you know, or with brain injury? How typical is his experience, would you say?
Well, yes, I mean, every case is different, as George says, but there's one theme running through everybody in racing, that they want to get back into it. And if they're on the sidelines for a day or a month, they're just desperate to get back. And it's often a real shock to the system that they have an unplanned retirement, if you can put it like that. And often people find it very difficult readjusting to, or adjusting to life outside their day job. And I'm sure George will testify to that. And when we're, you know, finding out about clients, it's often the family we speak to get that additional insight into how people are. And I don't know, George, what Nicola would say about you now, but, you know, how you are compared to pre-accident.
I think she'd probably say that I'm slightly short-tempered in regards to I get frustrated with things, but then that's a normal thing, you know. There's anyone that's been through this process can get frustrated at times with things, but I think I've been very, very lucky. One, that I was fit and young, healthy, having the fall, and it was, which is, you know, when you're trying to build yourself back up, is a good position to be in. And I can't tell you that. So for example, when I was in the Wellington, I'd have I'd have 4 or 5 therapies a day, PT, physio, and the psychological help I got there was probably more important than anything, to accept what my weaknesses were and that I was a different person. Obviously, I wanted to get better, and I aimed to come back to doing what I was before. But through that process, I got a very catered, and I was a professional patient as such. Ultimately, one goal to try and come back. Was that achievable? No, but it was a good for my mind to have a goal to come back. And I suppose anyone that has an accident in sport always wants to come back and do what they were doing before. And whether that was achievable, as I found out subsequently, it wasn't. But I can't tell you how important it is to get that early doors care, top level stuff. And I was just in the hospital I was in, overseen by sort of the top person in the country, Dr. Richard Greenwood, who sort of catered my therapies and stuff. I just got the best care you can get, and I was very lucky to have good healthcare as such.
Yeah, and I guess that's something you see, Richard, as well, is building that team of specialists around people to ensure they get the right care early on. Is that something you see across the board?
Racing is incredibly lucky. The welfare setup in racing is fantastic, and both jockeys and stable staff have some great insurance and great professionals employed to steer people through rehabilitation. People outside racing, I often think, are less lucky. One thing, George, I've listened to you talking before, and I know you mentioned that the difficulty in adjusting to the possibility of not riding again, and talking about Kevin Pearce,
yes,
the snowboard champion. Now, I actually I looked at the trailer for that, and I couldn't quite bring myself to play it. It looked quite a gruesome watch. And that's me, completely detached from the incident. So I can only imagine how difficult this was for those close to you.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it was interesting. So we've got a family friend called Nathan Horrocks who spoke to my wife a little bit when I wasn't very well and said, just, when you think it's right, it'd be a good thing for George to watch, because it was a similar sort of journey through. Was I at Kevin Pearce's standard in racing? No, but to see him go from being in some, world number one as such, to try and come back to do what he did to a high level. I sat down and watched it one evening, and I didn't really know what was coming, and it was the realization moment when I knew I wasn't coming back as a jockey, and I couldn't never be as able-bodied in the saddle as I was before the accident. And watching the film about Kevin Pearce sort of really hit home. Had I thought about it beforehand? Yes, of course you do. You sort of question it, but when I watched that, in my mind, I just accepted it. And am I emotional? I'm more emotional now. I've had the fall. I think I was very racing makes you quite tough on that front. And I watched I think it was an evening, I watched it at home with Nicola, and I was just crying because I knew that my time as a jockey was over, and it's hard to, George, a jockey, was done. And the whole process with giving that up was not easy. I remember going to Oaksey House to see Jerry Hill for my sort of meeting with him. Since the first time I'd seen him, I'd spoken to him a bit on the phone, and
he's a doctor at the British Horse Racing
for the BHA, and he booked in to see me at Oaksey House. I'd have a private meeting to see how things were going, and I was going over in the car with Nicola that afternoon. I think it was early afternoon, and I started crying in the car. I said, "Today I'm going to hear the news that George Jockey's over," and I still get emotional about it now. It was a thing I loved doing. I was getting paid to do my hobby, and to hear that from him, I knew it was coming, but watching that, the crash reel really hit home that my time was done. And I suppose you have character building moments in life, and that was one of them. It was a hard watch because I could see myself in that. It was like watching myself on screen. Obviously, I can't snowboard, but the process and what I put my family through. Because when I was a jockey, I'm not saying I wasn't a horrible person, but I was selfish. All I cared about was myself and achieving what I wanted to achieve in the industry. And you have to be like that, I think, in sport. And I took my family for granted, and through the whole process of getting better, the realization of how important it is to have a strong network around you in a time of need is massive. And I'll give you a bit of a context on that. I never put anything in place, if something happened to me, to look after my wife, i.e. Power of attorney, of joint bank accounts, all that sort of stuff. I just didn't think it went out to me. And I suppose you don't allow yourself to think that will happen. And through that, what happened, not being able to get, make sure the mortgage is being covered on a month-on-month basis is just, from my wife's perspective, it's, terribly hard. I was sort of the money earner at the time, and it's I don't know. You just got to be. I think any advice I can give to anyone going forward is make sure you've got all your affairs in order if something bad happens, because you never know what's around the corner.
Yeah, but it sounds to me, from what Richard tells me as well, is that obviously the horse racing community is exactly that. It's a great community of people. How have you been supported to maybe do other things with the sport that you love?
So when I announced my retirement, and some of my close friends knew it was coming, and I sort of confided in them a little bit, I got offered bits and bobs, and people are kind, but when it comes to going back to work, again, you've got to make yourself attractive, and just because you've been a nice person, you conduct yourself in the right way. So I announced my retirement on Luke Harvey, who's I've known for a long time since I've been in racing. I did it on his show, and I think it's called Get In, and I just wanted to do it. I don't know. Did it matter? No, not to anyone else, but to me, it was important to let people know that I was packing up. I don't know why I felt so passionate about it, but and from that, I got offered bits and bobs on TV, which I'd never even contemplated doing. And racing's very kind when you're trying to find your way. And I got offered plenty of bits and bobs, the things to do. And jets have helped. I've done a qualification MVQ level to go into jockey coaching.
That's the Jockey's Enterprise and Training Scheme, I think.
That's right. Yeah. And, there's as Richard said, there's a lot in place for when things go wrong. And I utilise that to the maximum, really. And i.e., when I left hospital, I carried on my rehab. I was at Oaks House 5 days a week. The Injured Jockeys Fund were, through early doors for my family, were massively helpful and aided me so much in my recovery, sort of post-hospital when I was at home, to carry that process on. And you take it for granted when it's happening, but looking back on it now, I mean, it's just, I've had so much help from so many people. And when it was really bad and I was in hospital, the amount of people that were offering things to my wife, flat to stay in London and flats and bits and bobs like that, it's just beyond. They really come together when the shit hits the fan as such.
Yeah, sounds like it. And like, Richard, is that your experience with everyone who's in the kind of the horse racing sphere? And I guess, how does that contrast with maybe people who aren't so lucky, I suppose?
Well, there's a contrast, isn't there? It is a fantastic community, but like the guy in the first team, one of the first 11, if you're injured and not playing, if you're injured and not riding, even just riding out in the morning or going racing, you are on the one hand getting fantastic support, and couldn't do without it. But on the other hand, I very often see a real sense of isolation. George, I don't know if that's something you felt, seeing the guys and girls you used to go and race with every day, and then you're just not doing that.
It's strange because people are kind and they keep in touch, but the thing I really struggle with, and I don't know if this is a normal feeling, but this is how I felt when I was riding. I felt like I was wanted. Whether it be my relationship with my agent, I'd speak to him, a lot through the day about plans we were going forward. Trainers would be picking your brains about things, and people were very kind and kept in touch with me. And but that feeling of being wanted and feeling like you're useful to being a full-time patient trying to get better, it's a very strange sort of pathway as such. And when I announced my retirement, people were I can't tell you, they're so kind, but you just kind of feel like, what are you going to do with yourself eventually? You're going to have to get a job. You're well insured. You get paid for your professional rider's insurance. And I got a capital payout at the end of my thing, career-ending insurance and such. And it's to not be to be someone that was I massively wanted. In my opinion, I was, and I felt I was doing what I loved doing for work, and all of a sudden it was stopped. You do feel quite isolated.
Yeah.
And it's bad enough planning for your retirement, but to have an unplanned retirement is really difficult to cope with, and which is why it's so important to be able to access all sorts of advice, and including in particular vocational support to work out what you might do in the future.
It is an interesting sort of journey. It is a journey because I'm sure if you'd asked my wife when I came home after sort of 4 months of being in hospital, what's George going to do? She'd have said he'll never work again, because it didn't look like an obvious thing that was going to happen.
Right.
And there's me sort of talking every day, banging on about coming back race riding, and she's thinking he's not going to be able to get a job stacking shelves, let alone riding racehorses. Do you know what I mean? And nothing against people that stack shelves, but I didn't have the mental capacity to be able to do anything like that at the time. And it was I was a patient for a long time to get to this point, and receiving all that care at a crucial time is so important. But the journey after is the hard part for me. You know, everyone, they get you home, get you safe, and you know, I had a young family, and I was pretty well set up as a rider, but I wasn't. You know, I have to work again. It's not like I was a multi-millionaire and couldn't do anything. I had outgoings, I had a mortgage, you know, all these things, and we just had our first child. You know, you sort of, I was earning fantastic money when I was riding, but you live a lifestyle, don't you? And it's hard, you know, when you can't maintain that when things sort of stop. So it takes a bit of adjusting. And from my perspective, you know, my families, you know, were aware what needed to be done, but for me mentally, it was a massive change. You know, I was the provider, and I was getting paid to do something I love doing. It's a change, and it takes time to adjust with all those sorts of things.
Yeah,
I was reading a report yesterday on somebody who can't ride again because of their accident, and this was a psychiatric report, and very often it's not only the medical the report from the orthopedic consultant or what have you that's important, but also a report on the psychological effects of these things, which can sometimes be much longer lasting and than the physical consequences in some ways.
Yeah, and I was going to ask George about that, because you mentioned that you're perhaps a bit more emotional after your injury, and you know, there's all these extreme challenges on your mental health, and that's, you know, a hidden disability in of itself. What would you say to someone who maybe they see you've progressed beyond your injury, you're getting physically better, but they can't see the other challenges that obviously you're experiencing, and maybe aren't being patient with people who, you know, aren't quite getting beyond it, or just aren't aware of the issues that maybe you're facing on the inside that people can't see. What would you want to say to them? I think
for maintenance perspective, you've got to, and this is anyone in life, but not just because of a fall that I'd had and change your career as such. But I think it's important to not hold baggage mentally. And if you've got something that's not quite right, and I would never have done this when I was riding, I was very much the one person I confided in was my agent Guy Jewell, and he was sort of my psychologist as such, you know what I mean? And a counsellor, and if anything, I used to offload to him. And I think it's important, and I've got in my role as a jockey coach, Tom, who's based at Oaksey House one day a week. You know, I often catch up with him and talk about people I'm looking after and helping them, you know, look after themselves. And if anything, it's helping me as well. You know, it's as much maintenance for me, offloading that baggage if there's difficulties with different things. So I think from a mental health perspective, one thing I've learned through the whole process is just don't hold on to things. You've got to let it out.
And I guess from the other person's perspective, allow someone to talk, even if they don't seem like they're struggling, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think, do I look like I've got? I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I look like nowadays. I put on quite a lot of weight, so I'm definitely bigger. But I think it's very mentally at times. You just got maintenance is important, and just look after yourself. And I'm so lucky with the specific injury I had. I've accepted my deficit so much, and I've seen a lot of friends in racing that have had brain injuries that can't get their head around that. You know, I know what I can and can't do. I know that I'm still struggle with fatigue, and I have to look after myself on that front. And managing my time is, you know, it's when I was riding, I was a ball of energy, and I you know, it was hard work, but it never entered my mind. And if I had to, I'll give an example, Richard. If I knew that this call was happening, and when I was riding, it would have just been embedded in my mind. I wouldn't have forgotten about it. Now my iPhone is reminders all through the day.
Yes, well, to
10:30.
your credit, you are asking me to make contact with you in the days in advance, and it seemed very well organised. But I can see how that is a way of adapting, a way of compensating,
coping mechanism kind of thing. Yeah.
So I mean, it's been an incredibly hard journey for me, but more so for the people around me, because it's been a massive change. You know, I'm not the person I was before. I accept that. And I'm just lucky that from that perspective, I've still got people looking out for me and help me out. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's an ongoing process. You'll never be fixed as such.
Yeah. Well, we're getting towards the half an hour mark, so I guess I will just say thanks very much, Richard, and thanks very much, George, for telling us your story and sharing your experience. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, so Liam, I think, as you'll have heard there, he's a really kind of amazing bloke to speak to. I mean, you wouldn't believe that he'd been, or undergone such a, catastrophic change in his life, basically. And he just speaks so candidly about his experience, which is fantastic. I think it's Action for Brain Injury Week, which is Headway's annual campaign to raise awareness of different aspects of brain injury. And this year's their theme is hidden disability and the hidden aspects of brain injury that people need to understand. So I think, this conversation with George, where he's just been so open about the challenges he faced, is really important for people to hear. I hope it was informative for you, Liam, and for our listeners.
It was indeed.
Yeah, so I guess all that's left for me to say is, thanks for listening. First of all, if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do. We're available on all your favourite podcast platforms, and if you can, give us a review, as it all helps with all the algorithms. So, yeah, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.